Welcome. How are we doing tonight? We're doing well? Excellent. It was a long day today. I'm kind of hungry, so this is a fantastic time for me to talk about some gut stuff. I like to talk about this topic because I feel like it's a pretty big buzzword that people don't know a whole lot about. Like what Laura asked me, like, what's a gut? Right? So it's used a lot. The term is gut. Like, what is a gut and why is a gut important for our health is kind of what I'm going to try to explain today. Hopefully we play nice. So in order to talk about the gut, we should probably talk about the digestive system and kind of figure out how it's laid out and what the different areas, what their responsibilities are. So essentially, we are walking, talking, moving donuts, right? So we have a hole in one side and a hole out the other. And actually, what we think is the inside of our body is actually our external environment. So inside our mouth, all the way through our esophagus, into your stomach, into your intestines, into your large intestine, out the bottom, out the rectum. So that is all our external environment. They are coated with cells that are designed to protect entry into our body. Now, with that being said, it's a semi-closed system, meaning that each segment has its own level of pH, or acidity, or alkalinity, and that's where different things get broken down as food goes through the system. So I always like to give you guys that visual of walking, talking donut. There'll be a quiz on that later. All right, so food goes in the mouth. This is where we start the breakdown of food. It's mostly sugars that get broken down into the mouth. We use our saliva, which has different enzymes in it. Once we go through the mouth, chew it up, start creating some breakdown of the sugars, and we go into the esophagus where the smooth muscle contracts using this thing called peristalsis. It's kind of like a wave type movement of smooth muscle, pushes food down into our stomach, where now the pH has a drastic change. This is where you're going to kill off bacteria. If there's any issues, now you're going to start to break down proteins. This is kind of the big one that starts getting chopped up and broken down in the stomach. Once you get through the stomach, the pH will then drop. And that's where your liver, which produces your gallbladder stores the bile that your liver produces. And that's where, when that dumps into the small intestine, it drops the pH significantly. And now there's different enzymes that can be breaking down more fats at this stage. So once the fats start getting broken down, you work your way through the small intestine. There's 3 different portions there. Then you go into the large intestine. This is where most of the water is pulled out of the stool at this point. Works its way all the way through, and then out the door. Just like that. So again, walking, talking donut. So the interesting thing here is, like, when we talk about the gut, this is essentially the gut. All right, so our digestive system, mainly when we think of gut and gut health, we're referring to like the small intestines essentially. But you can pretty much call this whole thing the gut. It's all part of the digestive system. And if one area is off and not doing its job, the whole thing can get thrown off. Next. All right, wait, did I do that? Okay. So there's a term called dysbiosis. Has anybody ever heard of this one? Nope. Has anybody heard of like good and bad bacteria in your gut? Okay. So there should be a balance between 2 main types of bacteria in the gut. One being they're called gram-negative bacteria, and then there's gram-positive bacteria. So basically, if these 2 types of bacteria, which are needed for us to live, so bad bacteria can be things like salmonella or E. coli, things like that, but we actually have those bacteria in our gut at all times. It's when they become overgrown and populated is where they can create trouble. So those are examples of like gram-negative bacteria. they can produce something called endotoxins. So endotoxins are things that bacteria produces, like when you're sick and you feel like crap, that's because your body is floating with all these endotoxins. So they basically promote inflammation, okay? They love sugar. Remember that one. Now the gram-positive, these are like your lactobacillus, so a lot of our probiotics, you think of that. A lot of those are gram-positive bacteria. And these can actually create something called short-chain fatty acids. A very common one is called butyrate, right? So short-chain fatty acids are something that the other different type of bacteria can create, and these promote anti-inflammatory processes in the body. So there's kind of a delicate balance between these gram-negative, gram-positive, where it's essential to keep us alive. You don't want to have all of one or the other. You want to have a good balance between those two. They love digestible fibers and resistant starches. Is anybody familiar with like soluble fibers versus insoluble fibers or anything like that? So we need some form of fiber to allow for peristalsis to move stuff through our system, right? So the different types of fiber, so say you have like an insoluble. That's like a plant cellulose, so like celery, take for example. Like you eat celery, you're not gonna break up any of those plant fibers. They stay in a form, they don't get digested, they don't get absorbed, and they just work their way through the system and they go bye-bye. That doesn't do much for our gut. It does help to kind of lower blood sugar issues sometimes, but these resistant starches, like let's use artichokes for example, green bananas, plantains, legumes. These are examples of resistant starches that these gram-positive bacteria can munch on and create short-chain fatty acids with. All right? So, the problem happens when you have a large shift in the population of gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria. These are things that can create the problem, the large shifts. So antibiotic use is probably the most common disruption to our gut flora. Has anybody taken antibiotics before? Yeah. Okay, did you do a repopulation of gut bacteria when you were done? Most people don't, okay? So kind of crazy to think about, like that's probably one of the more common things we use, especially in like kids. Like ear infections, they just throw antibiotics at it. You have a cold here, have some antibiotics. Even though it's a virus, it's fine. We don't want it to turn into a bacterial infection. So like doing those types of interventions, you're basically wiping out all of the gut bacteria in your gut. And then depending on how you eat or the different stressors in your life, you could now be pushing more gram-negative bacteria. Usually if we're eating more like sugar, standard American diet foods, refined oils, refined sugars, refined grains and flours. These are all things that those gram-negative bacteria will eat. And they use it as fuel, and then they spit out those endotoxins and create inflammation. Chronic stress will disrupt your gut flora. And stress can be mental, emotional, it can be physical, it can be nutritional stress, but chronic stress patterns can do this. Infections. So you can have some sort of a GI infection, which can throw off your gut flora. And if you have these underlying like low-grade infections for long periods of time, you don't address them, they can throw everything out of whack. So a lot of us probably are kind of like all through, any of those things look familiar. The infection one, like chronic low-grade infections in the intestines, like you could have parasites, you could have things like that. Those are more rare. Most commonly, people come in with dysbiosis issues if they just had a round of antibiotics or they were on a couple rounds of antibiotics, they eat a crappy diet, right, mostly processed foods, or they're under chronic stress. Say they're traveling a lot, they're going around traveling into different time zones, or they're working 90 hours a week, right? So different things like that, chronic stress can throw off your gut flora, which is kind of crazy to think about. So what happens if you have this dysbiosis or this imbalance of bacteria? These are some very common symptoms associated with dysbiosis. So digestive issues, that's the easy one. Bloating, gas, constipation, diarrhea, heartburn, pretty much any symptom. Skin problems, so you get rashes, so acne, eczema, psoriasis. allergies to foods, your environment, mood disorders. This is a big one. So anxiety, depression, autoimmune conditions like RA, lupus, multiple sclerosis, weight gain. So having difficulty losing weight. So metabolic syndrome is your body's inability to regulate blood sugar. All these things can be a result of your gut bacteria being out of balance. And it's all documented in research now, and they've treated the dysbiosis, and these things get better. Crazy. So we talked about the mood one, and I always feel like it's a little more important to look at like how it affects, how can your gut affect your brain, like create depression or anxiety. So there's a couple of very important things to think about when it comes to the gut region. So 90% of your serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter, you guys are familiar with like antidepressant medications. So they're selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs. And their job is to basically allow serotonin to stay in the system longer and not get brought into the cell. So basically it's trying to make the body think there's more serotonin than there really is. So a lot of people, the gut cells, your enterocytes, actually produce serotonin. And what feeds the serotypes are these short-chain fatty acids. So they're mainly fed by the gram, what is it?
Positive.
What's it?
Positive.
The gram-positive. They mainly get fed by those, which is crazy to think about. The other part of that is here, where our gut barrier has been shown to mirror our blood-brain barrier. So whatever the integrity of our gut is, they've seen a very similar structure into the brain. We're going to talk about how that barrier can get disrupted and what happens with that. Most of our immune system, a large portion of our immune system that communicates to all the different organs of the body is in your gut, and it's called the gut-associated lymphatic tissue. So it's all spread out throughout your gut system. And then communication via the brain into the gut is through this little cranial nerve called the vagus nerve, which runs from your brainstem down into your gut. So the gut is responsible for many different things, unconscious things that we're not even aware of, like your digestive processes, but also things like mood regulation, neurotransmitter production. It's insane how much is associated with our intestinal system, and we don't give it enough credit, unfortunately. So what happens when the barrier gets broken down? It's called intestinal permeability, something called leaky gut. Have you guys heard of that one? Maybe. So it's pretty common. Basically what happens is that what's supposed to be a pretty solid barrier to food coming through the system starts to break down. Now food particles can start to pass through this barrier where they're not supposed to. Now they start getting into our bloodstream. So when that happens, and this could be food, this could be the endotoxins that the gram-negative bacteria are creating, they can start to get into the bloodstream. Now you start feeling like you're sick, you're getting fatigued, you're getting brain fog. The body's response to this is inflammatory. It's like, wait, there's something getting in the system that's not supposed to be here. We're going to start a little bit of a war. We're going to try to clear this out. And then if this is chronic over time, this attacking of these molecules can then start to lead to something called cross-reactivity, where the structure of this food particle looks similar to a cell in your thyroid or a cell in a different part of your body. Now it starts attacking you. And that's where autoimmune conditions can start to come in. Play nice. All right, so this is a picture of your gut lining. So where these little fingers are up at the top is called microvilli, and they're basically like a brush border inside your intestines that are designed to increase the surface area so you can have more secretion of enzymes or things to break down food. So step one is here. We're going to have a aggravation to the system, whether that's through stress, medication, different neurotransmitters, neuropeptides. If your immune system's off, if your intestinal flora gets off, the body's going to start to create these little proteins to try to grab onto these these, whatever the stressor is, essentially. Once that happens, we get the breaking of these tight junctions. So there's some form of inflammation, there's some form of disruption to our flora system, and then these little, they're called tight junctions, essentially, begin to break apart, and that has this little entryway. Now we have peptides, things that aren't supposed to be getting into the blood system are now entering the system, and that's triggering an immune response. So now the body is going to start to produce these inflammatory cells to start breaking down the barrier, right? So it starts to weaken it even further, and that's where things like celiac, things like that, are basically you're losing the brush border of your intestinal lining. So this can start as something where it's stress, medication, something that created an irritation to the system, which turned into an autoimmune condition, and now you're stuck in this, your body's basically attacking itself. So that's where the body's constantly trying to fight all these food particles coming in, and now it's starting to react with like skeletal muscle, your pancreas, your kidneys, liver, brain, other organs, and it's creating illness. This is an example, very similar, a little nicer picture, but this is a specific to a gluten molecule. So an indigestible, you guys familiar with gluten? We talked a little bit on the last class that we had. Gluten is essentially a protein that comes from wheat that we don't really digest very well. So if there's a gluten molecule that your body does not digest and it gets stuck, the body starts to react to it with some inflammatory processes. Once these little junctions get disrupted because of the inflammation, that gets into the system, and now the body's like, rah, attacks it, just like that. Rah. But essentially, like you can see, leaky gut is a disruptor of a barrier, and it creates this inflammatory response, and now the body's making all these antibodies, right, to say, like, we gotta attack anything that looks like this. And that's where that cross-reactivity problem comes in, because your thyroid looks a lot like a gluten molecule, if you break it down to like a microscopic level. So what the hell can we do about it? So there's something called the 4R protocol. So this was based out of functional medicine, and this is a form of medicine where you look at lifestyle, but they also use like the body's natural healing responses to repair itself. So we're going to go through 4R protocol. Step 1 is called remove. So essentially you want to remove anything that's creating the body to have an inflammatory response. So it could be a food that you're sensitive to, right? Could be a medication that's creating an inflammatory response in the abdomen. It could be, what else?
Stress.
Yeah. Reducing stress, right? Because stress levels increase the output of something called cortisol, which is a stress hormone, which affects your immune system and creates kind of an inflammatory environment throughout your entire body. And that likely is going to end up isolating itself in the gut. Minimizing toxins, environmental triggers, but even like addressing the dysbiosis piece, right? So the imbalance of bacteria, gut bacteria. You have to get that cleared out. So that's step 1 is remove. So a lot of times they'll use antibiotic therapy in this phase. Now there's different types of antibiotics. One is actually a prescription. This is based on a research study that was done on treating dysbiosis. It's called Xifaxan, and it's basically 1 week of this antibiotic that does not get absorbed into your bloodstream. It stays inside the intestinal tract. 1 week of that was equivalent meaning like they had similar therapeutic results at the end, with oregano oil and berberine for a 4-week process. So the natural route takes a whole lot longer, right? Xifaxan is kind of like comes in and just wipes everything out. Now again, with certain antibiotics, people can have sensitivities, but I'd say based on the research with this, like, if you can afford that medicine, it's expensive. It's probably like $700 for the antibiotic. If you can afford that, it's kind of a shortcut, a fast track to clear out the gut. Now, symptoms being like diarrhea, heartburn, that kind of stuff from antibiotics are pretty common. They don't have like the issues of like tendinopathies or like, snapping tendons, things like that, because it's not getting absorbed into the system as much as like a regular broad spectrum antibiotic would be. So that's kind of a cool thing to think about. It's like, all right, you can do something natural, which doesn't cost $700. Berberine, oregano oil, relatively cheap. And you basically do that for 4 weeks. Similar therapeutic effects is important. Now, what else can you remove? You have to look at dietary patterns, so you have to remove things that are inflammatory. What would that be?
Sugar.
Yeah. So that's going back to, where are we at? Whatever. It was refined oils, refined grains, refined sugars, right? So that's kind of looking into anti-inflammatory diet, whether it's more plant-based or more animal-based. We're not going to go back into that discussion a whole lot, but it's kind of like you can find somewhere in there removing those processed foods, and you're already on the right track. So replace basically means that we want to put things into the system that are going to, so let's take one step back. So if we're in a dysbiotic state, we're not producing the enzymes that we need to break down food properly, okay? So this is where we'll add things like digestive enzymes. HCl is something that your stomach naturally produces. I'd say 75% of the people with heartburn actually are not producing enough stomach acid, or we think it's too much. Bile acids, if people have had their gallbladders removed or they have gallbladder disease, they need to have some form of a bile acid to help break down fats. And these are things where it's like you can use these digestive enzymes for a period of time and then take them away, and your body's going to step into that positive feedback loop and start producing them again. So it's kind of like get the inflammation down, remove the offending issue, replace the things that are missing that are preventing you from breaking your food down appropriately. And then we want to re-inoculate the system. So we removed all the bacteria, cleaned it out, started to make sure the body's breaking down the food like it's supposed to. Now we're going to reintroduce beneficial bacteria, right? So the best way to do this is through fermented foods. Yeah. Now, and this is like, you can look at research on this, like comparing the capsule-based probiotics to fermented food probiotics, and every time the food just crushes the result. It's insane. And probiotic capsules are expensive.
Yeah, they are.
Like you're talking $100 a month sometimes for the good quality ones. But fermented foods give you a pretty broad spectrum, which even if you're supplementing with probiotics, if you're kind of doing a reset, you're doing approximately 20 to 50 billion strains per day. Fermented foods, you start with one small serving, maybe like a 6-ounce serving, and you work your way up to, one of the studies did 6 servings a day. But it's kind of like, the whole idea is like you ramp yourself up. If you just start taking really high doses of probiotics, you just like eat a whole can of like sauerkraut, like, yeah, it's not going to go so well. You're going to be bloated, you're going to be gassy, you're probably going to be, who knows, man, like good things are not going to be happening from that. Because you introduce too much all at once, and now the body's going to start producing like the endotoxin. It's just, yeah, it's not good. But main point here is like the best way to get it through food, right? What are some good options for fermented foods? What we got? He's like, none. So kombucha, has anybody had kombucha? It's like a sour tea, basically, right? Yeah. Everything's sour with fermented land. Kefir is like a yogurt drink. Regular yogurt, Greek yogurt plain is a good option. But these things like, yeah, it's not a palatable thing, but we're pretty much one of the only cultures that don't eat fermented foods. And it's a taste thing. It's an acquired taste, and you have to basically work your way up into actually liking it. And maybe you don't. And then that way you think of it as like, my food is medicine. Does all medicine taste great? No. All right, good. Glad we're all on the same page with that one. All right, so we've re-inoculated, starting to reintroduce the bacterial levels in the system, and now we're going to repair the gut lining. This is our opportunity to come in and start to clean up the tissue inside the gut. Collagen, glutamine, zinc, things like deglycerized licorice, all these things can help to reestablish the tight junctions in the gut. So like glutamine, your enterocytes are those cells that kind of create the border of the intestines. Those cells eat that, right? It makes them swell and get nice and nutritious and big. So that's a big one. Repair, and then making sure that you're still reducing your inflammatory levels through diet, lifestyle. So remove, get the crap out of there, clean it out, replace, give yourself some digestive enzymes, make sure you're breaking down food properly, re-inoculate, let's put the bacteria back in so that we can start creating a nice balance, and then we got to repair the lining. So now we're not getting all those little molecules into our bloodstream, we're removing the leaky gut issue, and this is where people start to heal, because now your body's not attacking itself, it's not in constant war mode, your body can now start to heal itself. Kind of crazy. So this is the bottom line. The big piece of this is stress for a lot of people. We don't give that enough credit. I know we've had an actual class on stress, so there's like a lot of different ways to work with stress patterns. But the essential thing is, like, if you're living in this constant like go, go, go or fight or flight state, like it's actually affecting your health like significantly. And it's like, oh, I'm just a busy person. It's like, no, you're dying a lot faster than you probably should. Eat a whole foods diet basically means remove refined sugars, oils, and grains. So what else is there to eat? Right? So
Sauerkraut.
all sauerkraut diet. I want to see your journal with that. So that's Marco. He's going to do the next experiment. Is the all sauerkraut diet.
All sauerkraut.
You'd probably be sweating sauerkraut.
So yeah, removing the offensive foods is huge, and then eat fermented foods. Sorry.
I do like kimchi though.
That's all you do. I mean, the Koreans, you know, they know what's up.
Oh,
They eat it pretty much with every meal.
yeah.
Yeah.
I do love Korean food.
Yeah, man. Now the natto, have you guys heard of that? It's like fermented soybeans. It's like gooey, sticky. I don't know about that stuff. That's like a texture thing for
He
me.
likes it.
Ah. But it's like, find what works for you and like use it as a condiment. Like put it on top of something. It actually is like a flavor enhancer. It's kind of weird. But start small and work your way up. Unless like, you know, you need to do something more aggressive, that's where you can pretty much go, you know, gung-ho, like full elimination diet, clear everything out, go on the antibiotics. But it's like, if you were to just do these things and not have to worry about the whole 4R protocol, like this is a really good way to kind of set yourself up for success for gut health for the future. Now again, like resistant starches are important. There's prebiotics, but even like the research around some of that, a lot of it still leads to this being the main culprit. So you can get stuck into all that like prebiotic, probiotic, resistant starch. Like I don't want to eat like green bananas. I don't know about you guys. But he's like, I'll eat green bananas all day, but when you ferment that, and get it out of my face. But that's essentially it. What kind of, you guys have questions? Because I know that like I can get nerdy on this stuff, but this is kind of like breaking it down simple style.
How do you start? Just like.
I would start here.
Ooh.
This is the hard part. I like my
Yeah.
chips.
Yep.
Sure.
Chips? You can't eat chips?
I love chips.
Unless you're making your own with
Oh,
like
yeah.
not
Potato.
refined oils, but any kind of chips you buy, and they're gonna be made with refined.
Doritos?
That's the worst.
Oh,
No, actually,
man.
those are all natural. Like, I think they're made with
If it's
avocado
Frito
oil.
Lay, no.
Oh,
But
what?
they all
Get the
have
avocado.
Takis. Yeah.
Takis?
Get rid of the Takis, bro.
No. What if
Anything
you
with
put-
dyes in
If
it.
you do the 4 Rs, how long do you
Yes.
think it would take?
It's usually about a 3-month process, like similar to like structural care, because you're taking into account tissue repair healing time. Usually it's about a 3-month process. Some people it might take them a year. If they're that bad off, it might take them a year to, like, if they're stuck in like autoimmune conditions and their body's attacking itself, to get out of that, it might take them a while. If they start, like, they'll start noticing differences, but for them to like go into remission and things like that, it could potentially take a really long time.
Do we have to do, if let's say you're not in dire straits, you're okay,
Yeah.
just go to this step and do everything on this slide
Yeah.
without the clean out?
Yep.
'Cause that seems like that could send you into a, you know, how does your body function if you wiped everything out of there? How do you absorb stuff during that period?
So sometimes you can do, say, like the remove and the replace at the same time.
Okay,
But yeah, it's a lot more intense, and people can go through Herxheimer reactions where the body kind of like, that's basically like if you're kind of dumping out toxins into your system, like your body gets kind of sick. So like a cleanse can create like
Oh,
an
yeah.
illness, almost like flu-like symptoms.
but if you just did everything that's on this slide,
This is where I
it
was.
would take,
Yeah.
it would you eventually get there, right?
If you
It would-
did that for 3 weeks, I bet you'd start to notice a difference.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna feel a difference rather quickly, but to get to an end result where, like, if you're looking at stool test results, like usually about a 3-month, you retest, and then you'd see like changes in the gut bacteria. But some people, again, like can take a little longer depending how far they are on that spectrum. Because you also have to take into account, like, maybe it's not just their diet that's creating the problem. Maybe they're being exposed to something, you know, molds or environmental pollutants, which is throwing things off as well. So this is where I'd say most people are stuck, is in they had antibiotic use for long periods of time or multiple rounds, and they never restored their population of the gut, and now we're eating a standard American diet on top of it.
When you're in bad shape and they give you IV antibiotics,
Mm-hmm.
they can get more into your bloodstream level that way, right? Because
Yeah.
you can only absorb
You
so
can-
much through your,
Yeah.
or without getting really sick from that, right?
Right. Yeah.
Now, so that's gonna go the other way then.
Mhm.
It's in your bloodstream, it's eventually gonna wipe out all the
Yeah.
flora in your,
Intravenous are gonna, it cleans everything out.
Right.
Yeah. Mhm.
but it's working the other way instead of from the inside
Correct.
out, right?
Yeah. Yep. Cool. Anything else?
I'm stressed.
All right, everybody, let's go to Culver's.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. But something to think about if you're dealing with those health conditions where, you know, it's like, huh, that looks familiar, which I think most people are, right? Why not? Think of food as medicine, not something to fill an empty void.
That's all.
Right? Why are you eating? That's a good question to ask yourself. So there, when you get into like berberine and oregano oil, like you gotta
Yeah.
go by the package, like they're like what's a standard dose. So there's like milligrams, so like 500 is like 900 milligrams of berberine, and then oregano oil, depending on the potency of the oregano oil, that's different. So it's like 200 to like 400 milligrams of like the active component of oregano oil, which I think is like thiamol or something like that. I don't know if I said that right, but there's some like essential oil that works as the antibacterial component. I think it's like that, but it gets tricky. That's why like putting dosages for that kind of stuff gets rough. But it's kind of like if you follow the bottle recommendations, and usually you're doing it 3 times a day for essentially 4 weeks. But they do make like preparations. If you search, you'll find berberine oregano oil preparations just
Okay.
for like
Yeah.
gut health kind of stuff. And it's hard to mess those things up. As long as it's like an organic, right? Like it's not just like nature's made or whatever. Yeah, as long as it's a good quality, like third-party testing, organic based.
Kirkland.
Yeah, right. You're going into Walmart and grabbing all the berberine oregano off the shelves. It might not be the best quality. But again, it's like it's hard to mess that stuff up because essentially you're using it as an antibiotic. You're not trying to absorb it in so much. But yeah, you're taking it 3 times a day at a regular dosage, where normally you just take it like once a day as like preventative or something like that.
Would you fast at all when you do this, or would you just eat normal?
Normal.
Okay.
Yep. Fasting can actually, depending on the type of fasting you're doing, fasting can actually trigger a bit of a stressor to the system. So it's probably, like if you were to fast, you get intermittent fasting, like say you skip one meal.
Sure.
That'd be fine. But doing like 1 meal a day, OMAD, like that kind of stuff, like probably not the best idea. Yeah.
Did I eat?
If you want to do like a cleanse, should you do that first or the cleanse first?
I would, so by cleanse, what do you mean?
I don't know. Because I missed it in the shower.
Well, so like the cleanse is essentially the
Same
removal
thing?
piece. That's what
Okay.
they're doing. But now they're putting in like things to stimulate liver activity, which some of that stuff is researched and good. Some of it's like, not great. But if you were to do a cleanse, essentially you're doing the removal part. So that's like the beginning stage. It's like a elimination diet, and now you're adding in like things to stimulate liver function. So, cool.
Should you continue taking like your vitamins and stuff during this?
Yeah, you can. Yeah. Yep. So 5-part protocol vitamins, so multivitamin, multimineral, probiotic, which now you're getting fermented foods, omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin D3. And the other part of that protocol is an anti-inflammatory diet. But essentially like vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids, and a good like food-based multivitamin, multimineral is pretty much what most people have to take. Aside from that, like depending on certain things, you can take other stuff, but for most people, that's a solid baseline. That goes well with this.
Is there any homeopathic stuff that is good for gut health?
There's tons. I mean, homeopathics, like that's a whole.
That's a whole nother
That's a
clip.
whole medical field essentially, and like, yeah, I think I'm not familiar with any like protocols through that, but I know a homeopath would be all over it for dysbiosis.
Mhm.
Yep. Yeah, I don't know much. I took a class once on homeopathy, and I was like, I don't want to do that. Well, that's just too much information. I gotta like learn a whole nother system. Like, I'm good. I'm just gonna keep doing the chiropractic thing. Nutrition is good.
Mhm.
But yeah,
I could do this. At
no
home.
more Takis.
Oh, tag.
Mhm.